All right, so, and hello to our cherished listeners across the African diaspora, right? We welcome you to this edition of the Sankofa African series. In the past 3 months, we've been dealing with U.S.-African relations in terms of U.S. strategic policies towards the African continent, and especially the role of what? The African diaspora. Today is Friday, December 1st, and I take this opportunity to welcome all our listeners, right? Today too happens to be a holiday in Ghana, right, which is normally a Farmers' Day, right, a National Farmers' Day, where they try to celebrate the farmers in Ghana. So I wasn't even thinking that we were going to get our host today, because I thought probably they might be, having their holidays and will not join us. Now, today we have a packed show, right? Let's not forget that this program is brought by kind courtesy of Bell & Associate Consulting, which is a policy research think tank based in Ghana, and Budget IT, which is a non-profit organization that enhances citizens' understanding of their budget and matters of public interest using technology to raise the standard of transparency and accountability in government. Budget IT was actually founded in Nigeria in 2011 and recently expanded to other West African countries, including Sierra Leone, Liberia, and in Ghana, right? So those of us who are joining us for the first time, we just wanted to know that what is the Sankofa African series, we tend to inform and educate Africans in the diaspora and on the continent about great power strategic relations and policies towards the continent. Okay, throughout the month of September, October, November, we've been discussing U.S. strategic relations with the African continent. But today, we are going to focus our attention on the African Union resolution that was passed in 2013, right, to organize the diaspora as a unified region or the sixth region of the African continent. This has become very, very important as a result of the recent inauguration of the President Biden's advisory council on diaspora and engagement. So for the past 2-3 months, we've been discussing this very issue, right? Most people in the diaspora and probably on the African continent never have heard about the AU resolution on the diaspora, like us creating the sixth region. Okay, in the next hour and few minutes, we'll take our panelists. Our panelists will join us to discuss and to inform our cherished listeners about the AU resolution. Today, to discuss the issues, we have familiar faces. We have Mr. Tad Corker, who has been with us and has been a vital resource to this program. He's a senior security reform advisor and former U.S. Department of Defense Principal Director of African Policy. All right, we have Dr. Keela, who is not here at this point. Then we have Dr. Lakeisha Harrison, right? She's also a familiar face. She's been on the program before. She's a professional lecturer of African Studies and Assistant Dean of Student Services, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at George Washington University. Dr. Harris is a familiar face, like I said, and was instrumental in our discussion on the two constituents of the African diaspora, where we try to make a distinction between Africans who are descendants of slaves and Africans who are descendants of voluntary immigrants. And lastly, Dr. Shiris Nelson, also a familiar face on this program. Dr. Nelson is the founder of the Black Leadership Table and Dr. Jane Consult, and a higher education and professional political crisis management consultant. So let me take this opportunity to welcome all of you to this program. But before I get your opening remarks, it is a privilege to have Brad Cabe to join us. She's actually from the African Diaspora, Network, right? Which had its founder and executive director, Almas Nigis, right, recently be inaugurated as a member of the President Biden's Advisory Council on Diaspora and Engagement, right? So she is here to do a listening in because this is the first time, and I think she doesn't know exactly what to expect. So she will be listening in, and if she has to come in and contribute, she will do a contribution, right? But for now, let's get the opening remarks, starting with Mr. Tad Corker. Mr. Corker.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Your opening remarks.
Okay, very good. For one reason, the video is not working, but that's okay. Just as long as you can hear me, we're okay. First of all, Dr. Quay, thank you again for hosting this series and continuing. I think it's been a very useful forum. For me, it's a privilege to once again join everyone online and to be able to pass along whatever small contributions that I'm able to make. And so without further ado, thank you for the invitation and Akwaba.
Thank you very much. All right, let's go to Dr. Harrison.
Thank you for having me back again. It is a delight to be here. I always appreciate the opportunity to talk about the beloved African continent. I think for me, I'm looking forward to engaging in this topic from another angle today, and that's particularly how the African Union, how the sixth region can be actualized within the African Union. So thank you for inviting me back again, and I look forward to a stimulating conversation.
Thank you very much. All right, let's go to Dr. Sharice Nielsen.
Good afternoon, everyone. I thank you again, Dr. Okoye, for having me on. I would like to say that I think that that the creation of anything and everything has to first start in the mind, and that the idea that there is this resolution that was over a decade ago, I think that we have to talk about how do we capture the imaginations of people and put this at front of mind so that the creation of a sixth region of the diaspora is actually possible. Thanks again.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so I would like to give you a little background. I think I've sent you documents, right? But in order to educate our listeners and viewers around the world, I want us to go back into what actually culminated into the African Union passing the resolution actually in 2013, which leads to the creation of the sixth region, right? So it goes way back to 2004, where we have some intellectuals, almost like 700 intellectuals, meeting actually in Dakar, Senegal, right? What they call it the first conference of intellectuals of Africa and the diaspora, right? Which is referred to as CIAD, C-I-A-D, which was organized by the AU in collaboration with the Republic of Senegal, held in the country Dakar, under the theme, Africa in the 21st century, right? Integration and Renaissance. This conference was attended by around 700 intellectuals, men and women of culture from Africa, the Caribbean, Europe, and the Arab world. African state governments were there, as well as international organizations and organizations of the United Nations system. All right. Now, during the conference, there was a discussion of establishing the diaspora as a sixth region of the African Union. So that basically, what we get from that, means there are 5 regions already. So let me just take our listeners through the 5 regions. Basically, North African region, the West African region, the Central African region, the East African region, and the South African region. So these are the 5 regions. So the resolution was to have the sixth region to be in the diaspora. Right. Now, notable intellectuals who actually came from the United States, who participated in that conference in 2004. We had 2 intellectuals, right? Professor Sheila Walker. Now, those of us who are in African studies, right, know about Sheila Walker, right? She's a cultural anthropology writer and a documentary filmmaker, a professor of anthropology who directed the Center for African and African American Studies at the University of Texas at Austin, and the Diaspora and the World Program at Spelman College. That's a background. The next person that we had who also participated in that was Dr. Molife Kete Asante. Those of us from Howard, we know the works of Dr. Asante. He is the chair of the African Department and Africology and African American Studies at Temple University in Philadelphia, right? Yesterday, I had the opportunity to actually engage him, right? I sent him an email because he was one of those people who actually founded this particular group, SEAD, and he became the coordinator. So we want to get his insight as to what actually culminated into trying to form the African diaspora as a sixth region. I did engage him yesterday, and he said I should send him a formal request, right? So maybe next week we'll be able to have him on our program, right? Time with him for us to explore some of the issues that we have. Most of us in African studies or coming from political science background knows the work that he has done, right? So basically, SEAD, right, which was held in 2004, was a conference, right? After that, then they had a second conference, which was actually in Brazil, right? Some people will be asking, why Brazil? We'll come to that because we know that majority of the people of African descent, right, live in Brazil. So that could have been the reason why the second conference was also held in Brazil. So SEAD in Senegal to Dakar was followed with the second conference of intellectuals from Africa and the diaspora, which is SEAD2 in Salvador, 2006. There were a series of agreements in SEAD2, which included, so I'm going to give you some of the agreements that they had over there, just giving our listeners and viewers a background of how this whole diaspora as a sixth region came into being. A greater engagement, one of the agreements was a greater engagement of the African diaspora with its historic African roots will assist in overcoming the challenges communities in African origin face in different countries. Conversely, Africa is poised to benefit from a better organized diaspora, which can bring its support to the quest for sustainable development of the continent. Here, we can appropriate the works of various CSO, right? If we're talking about Africa benefiting, we've seen the works of CSOs and nonprofit organizations, such as the ADN, whose representative that we have over here, right? They've done a lot of work. So Africa is benefiting in terms of collaboration and partnerships, right? In terms of skills, innovations from the diaspora, which goes into the continent for development, right? So SEAD1 and SEAD2, right, provided an important platform of increasing global understanding of African Renaissance and underscoring the need for maintaining a dialogue among intellectuals from Africa and the diaspora, right? So it was also declared in SEAD2 that the African Union should promote activities of the diaspora as an important component in the building of the African Union so as to strengthen and support existing directorates of civil society and diaspora relations, which they call CIDO, in the African Union that deals with contacts with communities of African origin and other countries. So that means the AU resolution goes back as far back as 2004, right? So in 2012, right, they met again in Addis Ababa, which is in Ethiopia, right? And this time, during the 18th ordinary session of the African Union in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, they decided to recognize the African diaspora as a substantive entity contributing to the economic and social development of the continent, and to invite its representatives as observers to sections of the African Union, right? Now, part of the AU resolution that was actually passed in 2013, part of it reads as follows: taking into consideration the declaration of the first conference of intellectuals from Africa and the diaspora in Dakar from 6 to 9 October 2004, reaffirmed by the second conference held in Salvador, Brazil, from 12 to 14 July 2006, by which the intellectuals from Africa and the diaspora subscribed to the idea of making the diaspora a sixth region. So now they have made a decision that the diaspora should become the sixth region. We have recognized that. That is where we are now, right? So the question, let's try to explore these things right now. Given the background that I've given in terms of SIAD 1, right, which was held in Dakar, Senegal in 2004, SIAD 2, which was held actually in Brazil in 2006, then a follow-up in 2013, where they passed the resolution to organize the diaspora as the 6th region. Right. Now, my first question comes to you. I'm not a legal person, right? But if you look at the document that I sent to you about the resolution that they passed, right? I'm not a legal person. So let me come to you, Dr. Harrison, right? I want your thoughts, right? You've had over 15 plus years on forming and leading broad cross-cultural organization coalitions and initiatives on policy and law, right? Would you say that the AU Assembly resolution on organizing the diaspora as the 6th region of the AU falls short of putting in place procedures and legal mechanisms on organizing the different regions? So when I'm saying the different regions, I'm talking about, let's take, for example, the North American region, in which the United States and Canada fall in, or, right? Then you go to the Caribbean, where you can have the Jamaicans, the Haitis over there. Then you go to Europe, right? Then you go to Latin America. So all these things are different regions, right? But the African Union, if you look at the different regions, all these regions have their own legal mechanism, the way they are set up. Was it a failure on the part of the African Union in not putting up legal mechanisms by saying, you know what, we have resolved, we passed a resolution, we are leaving everything to the diaspora for them to figure out how they want to organize their own regions as a 6th region? Is it normal for the African Union, from a legal perspective, to be embarking on such an exercise?
Well, I can't speak to the normality or failure, et cetera, because I wasn't a part of those conversations. So without that context of knowing what came up and what did not, I can't really speak to that. But what I will say is 2 things. One is every new endeavor has to start somewhere, right? You have to start with the concept, you have to start with the idea that you want to aspire to. And for that, I give the African Union credit for acknowledging and realizing that the diaspora needed a voice and needed representation within the African Union, because we know that over the course of the several hundreds of years of the diaspora formation and existence is that there's been a disconnect between us and the diaspora and the African continent. And so I appreciate the fact that the African Union had the foresight enough to recognize that it needed to call the diaspora home, and that needed to do so in more than just a way of coming back to live here, bringing tourism, et cetera, that we needed to be involved in the governance of the continent, just like those who live on the continent. Now, the next thing I would say is, having not been there, there are 2 ways that you can go about kind of setting up a governance structure for the diaspora. You can allow the diaspora to do it for itself and not have the African Union attempt to speak for the diaspora and organize the diaspora, and allow the diaspora the opportunity to be our own leaders and decide for ourselves, amongst ourselves, how we want to do that. The other way is for the African Union to set up an infrastructure that the diaspora can use as a way to organize itself. My personal opinion is that I think the latter is better because of the fact, and this goes back to what I said in the last time we talked, the diaspora is so scattered, to your point, literally all over the world. We all do not communicate with each other. We all do not understand each other. We all do not engage with each other across all of the continents, let alone all of the sub-regions in between the continents. And so we need the African Union to lead in setting up some sort of structure that we can collectively then use as a basis to come together and organize ourselves into, because we are too broad, we are too dispersed, our cultures are different, our countries we come from are too different for us to be able to do that ourselves. And rightly so, many of us in the diaspora have already started organizations, et cetera, and entities to try to engage, to organize the diaspora, to go back and engage with the African continent and the African Union. But if you really take a look at it, there are a bunch of disparate organizations out there scattered around the world, all kind of doing the same thing and duplicating efforts. And so then that puts us in a place where we're conflicting with each other, competing with each other, duplicating, overlapping, et cetera, which we don't want to do. We want to come together in unity, hence the African Union. We want to be unified as a diaspora so that we can effectively engage in governance discourse with the African Union. But we need the African Union to really set up a structure for us to be able to come together. And I'll give you an example. Using the recent set of advisors the Biden administration implemented. Well, those are political appointees. In another administration, that group may not exist again, right? Or even within this administration, because they are political appointees, they have to represent the United States and the United States position on various issues and policies when it comes to the African continent. Well, there may be other positions that other members of the diaspora within the United States would like to take that are in direct opposition to a presidential administration's policies, right? So I would also suggest that however the diaspora is organized, it should not be tied to actual governmental leadership in specific countries throughout the diaspora, because there could be times when the government of a nation is actually at odds with the members of the African diaspora within that nation. And therefore, there needs to be independence for the diaspora to be able to interact with the African Union without having to feel like they have to carry forward the policy objectives of the countries in which they may live, or in the countries in which they may hold citizenship. But again, that's all very complicated, and that may vary from country to country around the world. And that's too much for all of the diaspora to try to navigate and solve ourselves, to come together with the billions of us that exist. So it is important for the African Union in these nearly 20 years, we're going on 20 years now since the resolution was passed, it is essential for the African Union to create some sort of infrastructure for us to fit into. I appreciate the deference the African Union gave the diaspora to allow us to take the lead, to figure that out, to speak for ourselves and organize ourselves the way we best see fit. But it's just too unwieldy. There are too many of us scattered around too many different places.
All right, thank you very much. Right, to follow up, let me go to Mr. Corker, right? Based on the argument that Dr. Harrison made in terms of tying what the organization to a government, right? Do you think probably in the near future, when we don't have this particular government in place, and we have probably maybe a more hostile government which is not friendly with the African Union, we are going to have any kind of problem going forward in the future?
Well, that is the. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, thank you for the question, and thank you to Dr. Harrison for the lead up to it. I think that is the dynamic, is that you have, and that's also not only the dynamic, but it's peculiar to the U.S. specifically, as alluded to and as the world well knows, in our democracy, our democracy is vacillates. It's during one period, it may be a Democratic administration. During another, it may be a Republican administration, and they don't always see eye to eye. and they don't carry policies forward. And so, so there are certainly periods where folks and many people kind of readily refer to former presidents Clinton and Obama to say, oh yeah, they were probably pro Africa AU, and when then there will be others who not I don't know that there have been very many who were counter AU, but we're not fans or advocates of the organization or of the efforts. And so to answer your question, absolutely, there are going to be, it's not going to be a steady or a level field over time. So that's one. The second is that I would just also add to the conversation interesting with Dr. Harrison and going back to earlier before the 2004 time period, but what she came to mind when she was talking about the diaspora and going back over time. My thoughts immediately went back to slavery, and so yeah, that's probably when it started. We went then to the scramble for Africa. After that, the African independence, relatively speaking, and then after that, the independence is when that brought us to close to the 2004 time period and this AU resolution on the African diaspora. A couple of notes. One is that I just mindful that the AU is I think in its relative infancy, and so it has not been around for a century or longer, and so it is before that it was the OAU and so forth, and now the AU and so forth, and so it is getting its legs, so it's getting its footing as it progresses. The second point is that curiously, during the period from about 2004 to the present, one of the characteristics of the continent is that it has been in a perpetual state of security governance and security challenges, and so it doesn't even have its act together yet. And that's one of the things why the AU has difficult kind of sinking its teeth into anything, is because of unlike the other countries that are sovereign, the AU, like the UN, is not, and so there are those challenges as well. I just made a mental note because I was in Dakar with President Wade, that it was the and with that 2004 meeting of the intellectuals, what I noticed when I reviewed the information was that I don't think that there were any representatives from Nigeria there.
Okay.
And I say that to say that back then, during that period, Nigeria, and may still believe so today, is that it was the big power in the region. And so it was, there were just those dynamics as well. Well, yeah, you having that, this over in Dakar, but it should have been in Abuja or somewhere else.
Okay.
So there were just those dynamics going on, and they continued to play over time. So that's what I would add to the conversation for the time being.
All right, thank you very much. I don't know whether Dr. Nelson is still with us. Right, Dr. Nelson, do you have any thoughts on not from a legal perspective, right? Do you have any thoughts on what we've heard so far from Mr. Coker and Dr. Harrison? I don't know whether she's still here. Okay, all right. So let's proceed. Right now, one could make the argument, right, that the second SEA conference, which was actually held in Brazil, was because of the percentage of the population of African descent. I'm just going to give you some statistics, right? Research has shown that estimates of the population of African descent in Brazil ranges from 65 million to 125 million, which is basically 56% of Brazil's population of 250 million people. This makes Brazil home to the largest population of people of African descent outside of Africa. Right. Now, this number is a little bit different. Comparing this number to the United States, this number does not compare to the percentage of peoples of African descent living in the US. In 2021, there was an estimate of 47.2 million people in the United States who identified as Black, right? This figure represents 12.1% of the total population. These figures show that the Blacks of African American population has grown by 88.7% since 2020. Right. Now, given that African Americans or Blacks in the United States wield so much political economic power compared to other peoples of other regions, right? Shouldn't the CR1 and CR2 take into consideration of engaging not only intellectuals, but African American Black leadership, right, in the United States, who possess a lot of political power, who are able to influence US foreign policy and have over the years played a role in terms of developing, resolving to conflicts in Africa? Shouldn't they have also taken into consideration Blacks who have political power, and not only the intellectuals, in terms of, like I said, Asante was there and Sharice Walker was there. They were coming from the United States. Shouldn't they also have considered other Black leaders who are in political leadership? Right, let's go to you. Let's come to you, Mr. Coker. Shouldn't they have taken that into consideration, given that the Black leadership have so much political power and they influence US foreign policy, instead of only focusing on Black intellectuals?
In my view, there are it could be just different approaches, and this whole issue of intellectuals, I am captured by it through the documentation and also through the experience. And so that's a practice, that's a custom, that is a way to approach issues, to discuss, to expand, and to brainstorm and so forth. And but in my impression, it seems limiting. That's on the African side. On the U.S. side, it's an entirely different dynamic. Why? Over the past 30 years, we have simply had an explosion in academic education opportunity. And so where in the 70s or so, 80s, it was 60s, 70s, particularly with the African American community. In the 60s, you wouldn't find too many African American families, whose parents, were college graduates. Fast forward 20 years, I would wager to say, it may be over 70% of African American families who now, benefit from a higher education. Overall, the U.S. public, education is out through the roof. There is, and also with the information and network and operations, our access to information is just mind-boggling. My impression is that there are many Americans and people living in America can legitimately consider themselves intellectual, or they have intellectual capacity. So and both in academia and also outside of academia, it's in other, especially in industry, it's in entertainment, it's in sports, athletics, it's in you name it, and we just simply have this enormous capacity. And I would say that you can take probably many people and say, okay, well, here's the problem, let's solve it, and let's move on. That shifts me back to what Dr. Nelson said earlier about the mentality and the mindset. And so, and all that put together, it is in the hearts and minds and moving forward, it takes the idea. It takes whatever uh, thing that we want to move forward, and to put everything behind it. And then once we have the right idea and we have the right vision, then we have the right aiming point, and you can get the intellectuals and others to mobilize around it, and then to start to generate to move the potential energy into kinetic energy. So to answer your question is that, well, yes, well, we approach it differently in Africa, and I don't know if this goes back to part of the socialist and Marxist views about the intellectuals and so forth, but it's just a different environment, and particularly in the U.S. and with what's happened over the past 3 decades or so. A, with technology. B, just simply with the explosion of universities and other schools. We just it is they don't line up in terms of African intellectuals and people and people in the U.S. who just have so much access to so much opportunity.
All right, so thank you very much. To follow up with Dr. Harrison, right? We've had Dr. Kida, right, and Professor Ngumbenwe, who is the president and founder of the AD, the African Diaspora Academy in Dakar, Senegal. And he has been advocating that we should start organizing the diaspora as a unified entity from the United States, right? But the problem that they have is that, okay, they want to organize it using CSO, civil society organizations. And we know that that is going to be very, very difficult, right? They want the leadership of African Americans, right, to take over organizing this thing. So looking back, hindsight 2020, doesn't mean that maybe they should have engaged the Black leadership long ago, right? Rather than waiting now, 10, 20 years now, trying to get Black leadership to come and lead this organization to begin formalizing the legal mechanisms and procedures to organize their diaspora starting from the United States.
Well, it's always easier to say what could have or should have been when looking back at history. What I would say to that is it provides an opportunity, a Sankofa moment, right? You've got to look back to figure out where you're going. Look back and reevaluate what's taken place over the last 20 years and figure out how you can reimagine it and improve it in order to do better going forward. I don't disagree that might should have been the way things started back in 2004. It did not. So this is where we find ourselves today. And I think you have made a very astute observation that's important for people to understand. We know the diaspora spread out all over the world. Some people know that Brazil holds the highest African population outside of the African continent, but most of us in the diaspora do not know that. And I feel pretty confident in saying that most of the people, the members of the diaspora in Australia, most of the members of the diaspora in China, most of the diaspora elsewhere in Canada do not know that, right? If you're in Brazil, you know, because you're very proud of that. If you're in South America, you might know because you're also proud as a South American and know more about South American politics and demographics. But that's still even a small population compared to the rest of the diaspora who likely knows about that. But that does not change the fact that in the United States, we hold the most influential constituency of the diaspora, right? We may not be the highest population, but we are the most influential in any number of ways. So my colleague mentioned sports and entertainment. We know that. I mean, with all of the ways in which we have influence the world in general, not just the African diaspora in those regards, but also our intellectual capacity. The number of African intellectuals on the continent who have been educated at American universities, right? Including my own favorite, Howard University, right here. But I think what's important now is to figure out how to leverage our political influence here in the United States to create an open and collaborative space for the entire diaspora. Because the other side of the fact that the US is the most politically influential, including our African diaspora, is that sometimes other parts of the world feel marginalized and unseen because we dominate so much. And so whatever we do moving forward, if the US diaspora is going to take a lead or the lead in trying to help organize the diaspora as a whole to actually carry out the work of our region with the African Union, we have to do it in a way that is collaborative and inclusive. We have to do it in a way that's respectful of the rest of the diaspora and not necessarily in a way that pushes US perspectives and US agenda. We have to all be in a space to be open-minded enough to learn from each other and learn about each other's experiences in other parts of the world. It kind of goes back to my comments from before. We don't know each other. And so we have to take time to learn each other in order to work together to move the needle forward with advocacy for the sixth region in the African Union, and recognize that there may very well be times when our policy objectives from one place to another might very well be at odds. There might be places where we can't reach agreement, and we have to be ready to acknowledge that and accept that, and then find, well, what are the things we can reach agreement on that we need the African Union to move and take action on?
All right, thank you very much. Let me come to Mr. Corker, right? I think that last time we had conversations about what the African Union wants to just leave everything to the African diaspora for them to figure out. They didn't want to engage in any kind of legal mechanism and all those things. They want the CSO in the diaspora to be able to organize some of these things. Right. Now, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. If we are going to have CSO in the United States, starting from the United States, to organize the diaspora, wouldn't that be a political organization, right? And if it's going to be a political organization, what should be the role? Should the AU mission in the United States have a role to play in actually organizing all these CSO? We are different. For example, the ADN is here, the DFA is here. We are scattered all over the place. Should the African Union mission, which represents the African Union on the continent, have a role to play to bring all these CSO together, or just leave it for the CSO to figure it out when the issue of politics come into play?
Thank you for the question. It's a very difficult question because of how you ended, and you ended with by saying on this, because on this political situation, and whenever we throw the term political in there, you know, it rises that to just a different level. And so I would be careful, because I don't see very many times where you have, you know, the political interactive at the national, at the international, at the foreign international relations, foreign affairs, interacting with civil society organizations and the diaspora. So so that's one. And then second is that, because when you talk political and you talk about the African Union as a political entity, like the United States government is a political entity, it's in my mind a challenge. Now, with that, I would say that that said, if about the Africa diaspora and the AU's ambition, and also I have to concede the ambition of the diaspora as well, because it goes both ways. You know, one is accepting of it, and one is it relishes it and is looking forward to it at some point as soon as possible. Because of the African Union character of it, affiliation. In my mind, it has to be the African Union first and foremost has to take accountability for it, and take the we have the expression, and we've used it in the past, is that the others cannot want it more than the parent. So you have if the parent doesn't want it, then the babies are out of luck, so to speak. And so likewise, when we go over and help in international relations with partner countries, and as Dr. Harrison said, you know, we have, you know, Americans, you know, are aggressive and are happy to take action and get involved and so forth. That said, is we cannot outrun well, where they are and how they're trying to do it, and also we cannot want it more than they do, because it doesn't work. And good examples of that are in the Sahel. There are a lot of foreign partners, you know, trying to help out in all regards, but all of that goodwill gesture did not have positive outcomes presently with how things are in those countries. So another aspect of it is that with the the AU has to kind of take the lead and get organized now. And even if they do so, I think that it kind of give and take. Yes, they should be out front and taking the lead. That doesn't mean that the people cannot help and offer help. Like Bella and Associates and others, you know, they may reach out and say, we can help you. Yes, well, why don't we? And one of the recommendations is that, yeah, you go out and you go and you put someone, you set up a small cell right there in Addis Ababa to try to bring this thing forward. I don't know, 1, 2, 5 people go out there and make a commitment 5 years to work with the folks at the AU to continue moving it forward. That's probably been one of the biggest disservices over the past 20 years or so, from the 2004 resolution to the present, is that it wasn't until 2024 that now we're trying to get you know, kind of get traction again. And so it has to go beyond, you know, the goodwill of efforts like this, and to put some kind of substance and the meat on the bone by going and making a commitment, sorting out, trying to organizing. We've said that many times: organize. And so who is organizing? Where is it? And what is the state of the organization of trying to move forward on this AU diaspora resolution? And then the last is that, again, just a caution, is that when we kind of, I don't know, I can't see quite yet how to merge the political level from the civil society level. That said, in my impression, that's part of one of the things that's missing in Africa, and that's the civil society. So you sent out all the materials from it, the extensive report. I took note from one from Muammar Gaddafi, and in that, you know, they were saying that we had to get get what one of his recommendations was the Congress, and that's one of the things that may or may not be currently absent from the AU. Yes, okay, it has heads of states, it has the AU, it has a good structure, but and this also goes back to the legal frameworks, is that they are not too good, not only at the AU but in individual countries. The most recently country that I served, one of the strategic priorities was to was to go look into the overarching legal and policy frameworks, and so they are missing. And so as we inspected all of the legal and policy frameworks from that country for the past 30 years, those policy frameworks had not been updated in 30 years. And so that is just a common practice, and so it is where he is, and that's why it's not so much of a surprise that we don't yet have those policy frameworks. What is missing in Africa is, and with this democracy, if it's going to go that route, is having the people representatives kind of not only speak on their behalf, interact with the civil society and the general public, and then legislate. You don't hear too much about Africa legislation, and so and not way up at the AU level, but down at the country and state level and so forth. And so that was a little long-winded, but in terms of the African resolution and how we move forward, those are just some nuggets, if you will. Over.
Yeah, Dr. Harris, thank you very much. Dr. Harris, what do you have to add to that? Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so what I just want to weigh in about this issue of political involvement versus CSOs. I think civil society is the way to go, and I think it is the only way to appropriately have diaspora representation within the AU properly. And what came to mind is just an example, right? We know the United Nations has done a study and published a report about discrimination, racism, and white supremacy in the United States, and the way it has detrimentally impacted those of us of the African diaspora here in the United States. If, hypothetically, the 6th region had already been organized and was actively involved in governance with the African Union, and the African Union wanted to move on behalf of its diaspora in the United States, in particular, say under the last administration, as Black Lives Matter emerged. African Union advocacy on behalf of its 6th region members in the United States would have been at odds with the political administration's objectives and policies at the time. But if the U.S. delegation to the African Union was set up based on political affiliation, then the African Union constituency there wouldn't have been in a position to actually help the African Union advocate on behalf of Africans of the diaspora in the United States. You see what I mean? So there will be times when the needs of the diaspora are at odds with the political administrations in the various nations where they come from. And so the civil society organizations are there precisely to address the issues that stand in the gap in the non-political space, that kind of help with advocating through the political space, outside of the political space, and the grassroots organizations and everything in between. I think it is essential that it is depoliticized. It doesn't mean that the African Union doesn't act as a political conduit for the 6th region when it comes to issues in other parts of the world or issues with other nations. Because to use the example I just or hypothetical I just posed, that would have been, right, a political position of the African Union to speak to a U.S. administration and say, okay, this UN report is here. What is the United States going to do on behalf for our 6 region members who live in your country to rectify this situation. That is a political engagement, but the representation, the governance of the 6 region cannot be tied to the political administrations of the countries where we come from. That does not mean each country should not have its own African diaspora delegations to the African Union or to the continent. I think it should be both. I think it is necessary to be both, but it needs to be clear that the representation of the diaspora needs to be depoliticized from the countries of origin so that the African Union can do what it needs to do on behalf of the diaspora members and the 6 region, and that the African Union is, the 6 region itself is then not conflicted or compromised because we have a mix of political actors and civil society actors in the midst who are actually advocating for different things, because one set is obligated to propose things that are consistent with the political administration's policy, and another set is there to propose things that are consistent with the needs of the people in those areas.
All right, thank you very much for all this inputs. Right now, what is very intriguing about all this? Let's take, for example, the ADN, right, which has done marvelous work for the past 10 years. Right, I've gone through their website and I've seen all the good work. So we're talking about what, CSO, but these CSOs are they are scattered. Let's take the United States, for example. They are scattered all over the place, doing duplicating each other, right, in terms of how they have to help with African development. What strategies can these CSO, with the help of the African Union being a country, what kind of strategy can they bring together to organize themselves as a unified African diaspora in the United States to set as an example to other regions of the world? Dr. Harris, do you want to take that? How do you think that these various CSOs and non-profit organizations within the United States, by using the African Union, can be able to come together to organize themselves, right? Instead of duplicating, scattered all over the place, engage in different actions and activities. How can we be able to have a strategy to bring all these people together under one umbrella in the United States?
So I think the African Union should convene organizing sessions. I don't necessarily think it should just be in the United States. I do think that's where we need to start, right? But yeah. I think it would be more efficient and effective if we did it regionally or continentally. So, convening a session of North America, convening a session of South America, convening a session for Asia, et cetera. And to the extent we start to get into regions of the world where there's a small population, maybe combining, right? But I think the key is convening a session that is led by the African Union and giving CSOs or NGOs a task before the meeting to come up with a list of issues and priorities they have as organizations. And it's specific to CSOs and NGOs. All CSOs and NGOs for the diaspora and diaspora relations in North America, this is for you to come to. Send your representation there, right? And then in the process of each organization kind of developing what their priorities are, in the convention, go through and literally figure out, where are the common things? What are the things we all are asking for doing? What are the things most of us are asking to be done? What are the things we each see that we need to be done? And then out of that, find the common things, right? That cut across all of the NGOs, all of the CSOs, that are the top 10 priorities. And I think that is the key. Convene, give each organization an action item prior to the convention to list their priorities. At the convention, literally go through and figure out what are the common denominators across all of us CSOs and NGOs that we all say we want. And that's what we move forward with. And if you do that region by region or continent by continent, then you can have a continental, right? Convention with the African Union, where each region now, when I say region, I mean region of the world or continent, comes together with their list of priorities, and then they do the same thing. And I think that's how you begin the process. And out of that regional convening of all of the diaspora around the world, you come up with your top 10 priorities there. And then you have gone through kind of a systematic and democratic-esque process to get to a place where the African diaspora has reached their top 10 priorities, because you've done it collectively with NSOs and NGOs in each of the main continental regions of the world to convene in the African Union. And I think that's where we start. At least in my opinion, but that is separate from the fact that I still believe that the African Union needs to come up with some sort of governance structure, because there's going to come a time when the sixth region is going to expect our vote, right? So in order for us to vote, we have to be organized and have a structure by which we have people that we elect to go and represent us, and vote on our behalf. Bring those issues back to us for us to discuss as a diaspora, as a sixth region, and then prioritize the things we want our representatives to take back to the conventions, conventions the African Union holds when it's time to vote and do elections and all of those different kinds of things. But we can't get there until we are organized. So I think both things need to happen. The African Union needs to come up with a governance structure for the diaspora, because we're too large and too vast. And in the meantime, while we're trying to figure out what our priorities are, convene these regional or continental sessions with NGOs and CSOs to come up with top 10 priorities, and then have a session where each region meets with the African Union on the continent, and then comes up with another list of top 10 priorities that represents all of the continental regions.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Corker, do you have anything to say to that effect in terms of organizing CSO using the African Union as a conduit?
I thank you for asking. The responses I do. I think it's all great in specifically with the organization, governance structure, and so forth. I would, in addition to CSOs and NGOs, I would just kind of put in a spacer, if you will, or a placeholder just for Africans, African Americans, just for the general public. And I don't know how to do that. I don't know if the public if CSO is synonymous to the general public or not. So I just don't know how to kind of put my head around how to make sure that we're able to include as previously said, as inclusive as possible. And so because when I think CSO, I'm thinking of a specific organization and an entity, if you will, that is doing a particular work or job, like building and such and so forth. And so but how do we get the members? And in that regard, I don't know. In addition to having the convention, if there is just an African, in addition to the convention, and I don't know how ambitious you want to be. If you want to kind of have it open to a large group of both entities like CSOs and NGOs and individuals, or not. Also, in terms of organization, I would say that I would keep in mind the main areas that are of utmost importance to Africa, to the African Union, and the areas in which they are looking for help and evolving and prosperity and and so forth. So, and I don't know if that's translatable to the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, or not, and so forth. I don't know if if there is an area for food, if there's an area for security and safety, and or business or entertainment or whatever. So when people kind of get together to brainstorm some of this, they think also, in addition to this organization, CSOs, GSOs, they're also maybe functionally or topically, how are we organized, if you will, to make the right connections to advance the African continent, and also to advance just the general public. When Dr. Harrison talked about the white supremacy and others, the racism in the U.S., it's that's quite not very chilling, and particularly chilling for somebody who served in the military for decades, and so as in America, we have moved away from nationalism to a particular color nationalism, and that is that's a very, very haunting prospect. With that said, we just, as we have for a long time, we need to just kind of put our best foot forward and advance. But to answer your question, is that in addition to what Dr. Harrison has mentioned about the organization and the top 10 or so priorities, CSOs and NGOs, you should also kind of think about it on the individual level, and also on the topical or functional level, to see if that makes sense.
All right, thank you. All right, let's go to our very last topic, right? So we've seen building of partnerships, collaborations with CSOs and nonprofit organizations from the diaspora, the African continent, in terms of development, right? So the question that has been on the minds of many people is, what are the benefits and opportunities for African CSOs and nonprofit organizations? We've had a situation where we had the CFA, Constituency for Africa, which is actually founded by Melvin Foote, who has on several occasions accused African leaders, right, or African embassies in the United States that when it comes to businesses, consultancy, and things like that, they ignore the CSOs, they ignore nonprofit organizations, and they prefer dealing with people on K Street, the lobbyists on K Street. They don't come to, even though we have CSO organizations which are related from the African continent, they don't come to them. So the question is, what are the benefits, or what benefits and opportunities should be there for some of these African diaspora CSOs and nonprofit organizations? Should we just always giving and not having anything in return? But that has been the criticisms that Melvin Foote has always had with African governments and African embassies and businesses over here, in terms of contract consultancy given to people on K Street instead of reaching out to them. What's your take on Melvin Foote's criticisms of the African Union and its policy in terms of not dealing with African diaspora organizations? Dr. Harrison.
Well, I would say that if the diaspora, the 6th region, was formally organized, that would be one of those issues that we would take to the African Union as a priority of ours, right? In theory, for the African Union to address. But at the same time, as the 6th region, if we were more organized, we might actually have businesses, we actually might have more formal ways that those contracts could be beneficial or given or fulfilled through African diaspora organizations and businesses. But that it's kind of that's part of the issue, is that we're not fully organized. We as a diaspora are still also dealing with the institutional discriminations and barriers that we have within the countries where we exist that make it harder for us to compete with larger contractors who have more money and more resources at their disposal, that make it easier and more attractive for them to advertise and get access to African nations or African unions, right? So we're dealing with discriminatory infrastructure within the countries we're in that, if we were organized and formally moving within the African Union, could be addressed in order to create more opportunities for CSOs or NGOs or Black contractors or diaspora businesses to be able to be involved in. So, you know, it's kind of the chicken or the egg, or putting, maybe that's a wrong analogy, but the idea is that if we can get ourselves organized, some of these things might actually be resolved, because they might actually be some of those top 10 priorities that we move forward with the African Union. But it's going to take a while before we get there. And, you know, Mel Foote is a mentor, and I love him and his energy, and he has been doing this work for decades. And so I don't disagree with his assessment and his experience. And I think there is something to be said about it. Like, for example, one of the things that I would love to be able to see is with the African Continental Free Trade Area. Where's the place for the diaspora in that? Right? We're not organized to have a place in that, but we ought to have a place in that. And similarly, when it comes to it, one of the key things regarding implementing the AFT-FCA is to remove kind of like the border restrictions, the free movement of African peoples around the continent. Well, we as a diaspora, we don't even have dual citizenship in most countries. Some countries allow us to have dual citizenship, but most of them have not opened it up to us yet, right? So if we're going to engage and have a footing on the continent in business, one, we need to start with, okay, you as a diaspora, we really do want you to come home, and we are opening up our immigration processes in order to allow you to come home, to literally build a home here. Ghana has been doing a lot of that. South Africa has been doing some of that. There are some places that have been doing that, but not enough. Out of the vast majority of the countries on the continent, there are not enough that are opening up space for Africans of the diaspora. And in this situation, I'm specifically talking about those of us of the old diaspora, the forced diaspora, because those who are of the immigrant and refugee committee, they know where they come from and they already have citizenship there, right? The rest of us do not. And that's a whole lot of us, right? In terms of the numbers of us in population, we need a place to come home to give us some footing and grounding on the continent in order to understand better about how to do business, what business opportunities there are, and to get to know business developers, business leaders, and even those leaders of the countries on the continent, so that we have that networking opportunity to have FaceTime with them and to get to know them and them to get to know us in order to help break down barriers to doing business and contracting. So it's multi-layered and multifaceted, and I don't think there's any one way that we can say that there is a solution or a reason for it. But what I do know is that in order for us to get there, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. We need to have, if you want us home, you've got to give us a way to get home. And then once we're there, you've got to include us in things like the African Continental Free Trade Agreement or area, right? And what is the structure for how we engage in that? So it's complicated, as everything is when it comes to diaspora work, but I think it's doable. But again, it's one of those things where we have to get ourselves organized.
All right, Mr. Coker, what do you have to add to that? That's an interesting point that Dr. Harrison made. What do you have to say to that?
I agree.
I know you've been on the same program with Melvin Foote, right? And you had his frustration.
Absolutely. So I have the only thing I would add, not only I would add, but I have to embellish on the one, and that if the sixth region kind of was up and running, this right now might be a moot point. Here we are where we are, and said, but in order to get to that end state of a functional six region, it's going to require resources, period. And so and you can either go and align with Honorable Mr. Foote or otherwise. The approach is that the AU must the AU must keep in mind that this is its investment. And so it has to, if it is making an investment, it has to resource that investment so that investment can produce be productive, over time. But there's no escaping it. Resources are essential to put getting this thing on the proper footing and moving forward. Now, it may seem the U.S. is a rich, wealthy country. Period. Africa is an impoverished continent. Okay. In that impoverished continent are billionaires. In that impoverished continent are resources. In that impoverished continent, many countries are quite wealthy, and also AU coffers are not bare. There are resources in the AU coffers. And additionally, we know from professional experience that if the AU needed something, if it needed help, specifically resources, it has other avenues to try to acquire them. For example, international donor partners, or for the big NGOs, the UN or EU or ECOWAS or otherwise. So resources are available if asked for and if sought out and desired. So that would I think they are they're accessible. I think it would be just a legitimate request, whatever that may be or from who, and they should kind of take that with that. I would say on the topic and on finance. Hopefully, the Diaspora conference or whatever it will be named. I'm mindful that I think it's in the spring of next year. I think it may be the 6th annual Africa CEOs conference or convention. And so again, they kind of at some point they decided that, well, we need to organize, and then we need to kind of move forward with this. So there are some heavy hitters kind of who have been meeting on an annual basis here for a number of years now, and hopefully that will be the Africa Diaspora will follow suit in short order. So to round it out, I do think that it should be that the AU should commit resources to the effort, and it does. I don't know, depending on how they can make their own decisions on how to do that, either by starting with one continent, the U.S., or starting with another continent, the southern hemisphere or Brazil or elsewhere. They can do it, and it would be the strongest recommendation that they do apply resources to it. Otherwise, you're asking for people to be self-sustaining, and it's whether or not a person has a good enough will to do that. So I don't know if that answers your question or if that was a sufficient backup to Dr. Harrison.
Sure, I think that's feasible. The point is that organizing means you have to put in the resources. And I think for the past decades that maybe the African Union has not come to the realization that it is the one that is actually going to benefit. So if you are going to be the one benefiting, then it is hard time you put the resources into these organizations or these CAs for them to be able to come together. I don't think that's, we've had our own conversation. I've reached out to the African Union on several occasions. Yesterday, I spoke to the secretary to the African Union ambassador. We're trying to see how best we can help them collaborate, right, to bring these CSO into Washington, D.C. somewhere in January, right? And even if you talk to them, it's like, you don't know where their head is, because organizing means what they have to put in resources. And for me, I'm just like, okay, if you have to put in resources, there are over 50 African Union embassies over here, right? You could be able to collaborate with all these things to raise the resources, but maybe this is too much work for them to do. Dr. Harris, your last thought, then you get a closing remark. Don't you think probably they see it to be too much of a work, right? Given the complexity of U.S. system. Wouldn't you consider that our legal system in trying to put all these things, get into contact with political leaders, CSO, all these things, they are taking into consideration all these factors. And it's like, you know what? I don't think we are ready to do that. Just leave this thing alone. It's going to come together at the right time.
Well, I mean, I think you also spoke into something that's not very uncommon, in that many organizations, political or otherwise, when it comes to issues related to Africa and the diaspora, are under-resourced, understaffed, under-financed, all of those things. But to my colleague's point, it's not like the continent lacks finances one way or another. There's money there. It's just going into certain people's pockets, right? And so we have to find a way to leverage that money to provide additional resources to staff up the African Union's offices, delegation here in the United States or other places, in order to provide them with the resources to do the work. Because as I've said, my opinion is that the African diaspora, the 6th region, is not going to get organized itself because it's too broad, it's too massive. We're too disparate, not just geographically, but in our socio-cultural, economic backgrounds to be able to do that ourselves. The African Union is going to have to do it, which means it's going to have to put up the money in order to secure the staff and the offices to be able to get the diaspora organized. But to your point, no, they're not going to be able to do it with the status quo. There's just simply not enough staff. There's not enough representation to be able to do something like that. In order to do it, they will have to increase the staff and do the work. And that's easy for me to say. It's easy for you to say, because we don't currently have a say at the African Union. Right? We literally don't. We have no control over whether they do that or whether they don't. We can say it, they can hear it, but whether they take action on it is up to them. And I think that's kind of like the catch-22 we're in as the diaspora, is that there are a lot of ideas we have. There are a lot of ways we think that we could organize and be beneficial to the continent and to participate in the African Union. But until the African Union itself hears it and decides to actually do something about it, we're very limited in what we can do because we don't actually have any power yet. Right now, we are a 6th region on paper, but not in action. And until we get to the point where we have action and we have a foundation and structure under us that gives us the influence we need as a region, we can talk and convene these kinds of sessions and have these types of discussions all the time, and it's not going to make any difference because the power lies with the African Union right now, not with us. So I, again, will end where I started and say that I appreciate the fact that the African Union had the foresight to recognize that we as a diaspora needed to have a voice and needed to be an official region. But now, going on 20 years later, the African Union needs to practice Sankofa, look back and see what didn't work over these last 20 years in order to figure out where we're going to go forward in order to actualize and realize the sixth region as a true, fully formed and fully empowered member of the African Union. And the last thing I'll say is it is World AIDS Day. We need to make sure we acknowledge that, because no other peoples on this earth have been impacted by HIV and AIDS the way people of African descent have. We disproportionately suffer from the consequences of HIV and AIDS compared to other peoples around the world. And so I want to make sure I take the time, I am wearing my red ribbon, to acknowledge those who have passed on, those who are survivors of those who have passed on, and those who are living with it. We need to get to a point where we can reduce and eliminate these numbers of infections and still move forward with trying to find a way to secure a cure.
All right, thank you very much. All right, Mr. Kwaka, your closing remarks.
Thank you again for having me and bearing with me as I share my thoughts and observations. I would about a couple closing because I've been putting a note in my notes repeatedly throughout this session. And so, and my note, Dr. Quay, goes back to what we have spoken about before. That's D3, and that you started off the program with the D3. So, and that's the U.S. government's policy towards Africa, defense, development, and diplomacy. And that reminds me that. That is the face of the U.S. within Africa. And so if you go to any of the mission over there, those are the three components. That's how the U.S. government interfaces on the continent. Diplomats, defense attaché offices, and development offices are the primary ones. And it doesn't have they don't have a diaspora officer, or they don't have other type of officers there. I have been a long proponent of kind of rethinking specifically U.S. missions abroad, but that's neither here nor there. Now, and that said, I would say that I would also add that it is I would say common knowledge that the U.S. government has allies, and then it has partners, and then it has others. And so, and its allies are I don't know that it has any allies on the African continent yet. It has several partners. Okay, that to say that and they approach these categories in different ways, and so now that to say that I don't know of any time in American history where the U.S. government has been what we would use the term all in on Africa. So and I don't envision that in the foreseeable future. And it is what it is. We were talking about resources and what the AU has, and I also said that we're a wealthy country. The U.S. is a wealthy country, it would not be, it's a rounding error. It's an accounting error if the U.S. Said, okay, well, here's $1 billion US a day to Africa. The folks would not blink an eye. If we're able to do that in Ukraine or to Israel or something, but you cannot do that for the largest body on the continent or in the world, on the globe, then you can't. It is what it is. So the data kind of speaks for itself. So that to say is that we have to we have to kind of know the environment, know where you are, and then how you move forward. And so that's why it kind of that's even the more reason why we need to make sure that this effort is to use a coin of phrase, self-sustaining. And with that said, I'll pass it along.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Corker, and thank you, Dr. Harrison, and also thank you to our guests from the AD, the African Diaspora Network, for joining us today, right? To our listeners and viewers around the world, we say a big thank you for listening into the Sankofa African series, and we hope that next week or the week after, we are going to return to our regular programming where we focus on the 3 Ds, which is diplomacy, development, and defense, right? We may have to go back to defense and start discussing some issues on defense in terms of the coup d'etats that recently happened in the West African region. Just about a week ago, we had something on Sierra Leone. So basically, we might return back to our 3 Ds. And it's me, Dr. Akwe from New York. I say thank you and see you next week.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Bye, everyone. I look forward to the recording.
Sure. Okay.